When the Puritans came to America in the year 1630, their chief governor, John Winthrop, gave the number one reason for the Puritan migration. He wrote,
"It will be a service to the church of great consequence to carry the gospel into those parts of the world, to help on the coming of the fullness of the Gentiles, and to raise a bulwark against the kingdom of Antichrist, which the Jesuits labor to rear up in those parts."
In the 19th century, the great historian James Atkin Wiley, known for his magnum opus, The History of Protestantism, also published extensive writings on the workings of the Jesuit order. Through his research, Wiley came to believe that the society was the most evil company of men ever to exist. In particular, he wrote, "Jesuitism is the last development of popery. It is not only the most wicked society that ever existed upon the earth, it is the most wicked society that ever can exist upon it. It is pure abstract vice embodied in a concrete organization. It is the incarnation of the wicked one. It is the veritable establishment of hell itself upon the earth." What could it be about this society that would deserve such extreme condemnation? As we will see, Wiley was not alone in his view. To discover why, we examine the witness of history, both past and present. The Jesuit order, properly known as the Society of Jesus, was approved by Pope Paul III in the year 1540 to launch the Counter-Reformation. Their purpose was to overturn the Protestant movement, which had begun during the time of Martin Luther. When Luther burned the papal bull and declared the Pope to be the Antichrist, many were compelled to turn away from Rome. The Protestant movement spread across Europe and in time extended into countries abroad. The role of the Jesuits was to oppose Protestantism throughout the world, to bring mankind back into the Dark Age, and ultimately take control of all lands in the name of the Pope. From the beginning of the American colonies, the early Christian settlers warned against the activities of Roman Catholic Jesuit priests. It was well known that they desired to subdue the new American territory on behalf of the Pope. As a result, in 1647, Massachusetts Bay banned Jesuit priests from the colony. upon pain of death if they should return after their banishment. Because of their methods of deception, treason, and assassination, they were driven out of the countries of Europe dozens of times, most often by their fellow Catholics, until they were finally abolished by the Pope himself in 1773. Pope Clement was poisoned within a year of banishing the order. His death was blamed on a Jesuit assassin. By the year 1814, the order was restored. In a letter to John Taylor, John Adams wrote, "We curse the Inquisition and the Jesuits, and yet the Inquisition and the Jesuits are restored." Adams also wrote to Thomas Jefferson in the year 1816. He said, "My history of the Jesuits is not elegantly written, but is supported by unquestionable authorities, is very particular and very horrible. Their restoration is indeed a step toward darkness, cruelty, perfidy, despotism, death, and I wish we were out of danger of bigotry and Jesuitism." Meanwhile, the Marquis de Lafayette, who famously served with George Washington during the American Revolution, once argued that, "It is my opinion," he said, "that if ever the liberties of this country, the United States of America, are destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Roman Catholic Jesuit priests, for they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to civil and religious liberty. They have instigated most of the wars in Europe." It was out of war that the order was born when a Spanish soldier named Ignatius Loyola was wounded at the Battle of Pamplona in the year 1521. A cannonball shattered his leg, ending his military career.
The Jesuit order comes down to one man, Ignatius of Loyola. And Ignatius was from the family of Loyola, a minor royal family. And he was actually an admirable guy. I mean, he was a good soldier, so good that when he was injured by a 1 in a million shot, a cannonball coming and bam, hitting his leg, the enemies took care of him and then sent him back to his family at Loyola. That's a noble soldier. And again, that's a great start, and the devil would love to taint that kind of a person. And he was a Roman Catholic. And while he himself loved reading books of romance novels, what he found when he was recovering were Lives of the Saints.
Loyola read books about the lives of Roman Catholic saints, including Dominic Guzman, founder of the Dominicans, the order that ran the Inquisition. Loyola was influenced by their zeal for Rome and their devotion to Mary.
He was so devoted to Mary that he started having these visions while he was in his recovery.
Ignatius of Loyola is the founder of the Jesuit order, and he converted after an interaction with a vision of Mary. And he had other visions as well. He claimed to have had a vision of the Holy Trinity in the form of a harp or a lyre, a stringed instrument. And he had another vision of a serpent with eyes all over it. It's just crazy, weird stuff. This is the man who established one of the most prominent orders in Roman Catholicism, the Jesuit order. And it was established based on a vision of Mary, a vision of a harp, a vision of a serpent. And if you read the history of the Jesuit order, they consider Mary to be the mother of the order, which is surprising since they also consider Mary to be the mother of the church.
And through all these visions, he started getting the idea of how he could live this kind of a new holy life and dedication. But nonetheless, in his recovery, he spent a year in a place called Manresa in Spain, in a cave, and started having these experiences. And he wrote all these notes. And under this kind of spiritual guidance, and I don't think it was God that was guiding him, he came up with this kind of a training. And in the end, when he applied this training to other people, it was like a brainwashing. I mean, they literally felt like enlightened people. In fact, they eventually got the name alumbrados, which in Latin would be Illuminati, enlightened ones.
The spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola are continued among the Jesuits and others even today. Yet critics argue that his visions supported heretical doctrines, which are often contrary to Scripture.
The spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola are not just harmless exercises. They're actually exercises that were inspired by apparitions of Mary and demonic doctrines that he'd received from them.
For Loyola, the visions he claimed to have only confirmed the doctrines of Rome and the papacy. Shortly after their acceptance, the Jesuits were called upon by Pope Paul III to play a key role in the Council of Trent, the first major event of the Counter-Reformation. The council denounced the Protestant reforms, in particular, the teaching that salvation is by faith in Jesus Christ alone. The council declared, "If anyone saith that faith alone in the divine promise suffices for the obtaining of grace, let him be anathema." The Protestant view is based in part on the teachings of the Apostle Paul, who wrote, "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." In contrast, Rome taught that salvation was only possible through the sacraments, or various rituals defined and administered by Rome herself. The Council of Trent declared, "If anyone saith that the sacraments of the new law are not necessary for salvation, let him be anathema."
They teach the sacramentarian view of salvation, that the sacraments bring you salvation, and if you fall away, you go back to the sacraments, they will bring you back to the truth. Whereas the Reformers believed that you're justified by faith alone in the finished work of Christ. So they would use the scripture, "Through this man Jesus is preached unto us the forgiveness of sins, so that all who believe can be justified from all things that they could not be justified under the law of Moses." Now that's what the Bible says, and that's what makes it clear.
Luther and the Reformers argued for a return to the clear teachings of Holy Scripture, to believe the Bible as the only true Word of God.
The Protestant preaches that we should believe the Word. And Paul says in Romans 10:17 that faith comes by hearing and hearing by the Word of God. And so the Protestant would say that it's through the foolishness of preaching the gospel that God has ordained to save His people. The Roman Catholic would say that it's by believing in the church.
Yet according to the Council of Trent, faith in the church and its sacraments does not necessarily lead to heaven, since a Roman Catholic can only hope to end up in purgatory, a place where they must be burned for an indefinite period of time until their sins are fully removed.
So even though you go through all the sacraments, you still haven't found peace with God. You'll have to go to purgatory and be cleaned up. So that, to me, is blasphemous because I'm saying that Christ's blood doesn't cleanse me from all sin when I confess my sins unto him. He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So the Protestants preach a sudden, definite change that occurs when a person believes the gospel. He's saved by the power of God. He's born from above. He's reconciled to God, who before was at enmity with God. All those things take place when he believes on Jesus as a Savior. Whereas in Rome, none of those things take place because they never come into focus.
Despite these arguments, the Council of Trent pronounced an anathema on anyone who would deny the doctrine of purgatory. Loyola's contribution towards the absolute authority of Rome was significant. His spiritual exercises established rules for how his followers were to think. He said, "We must hold fast to the following principle. What seems to me white, I will believe black, if the hierarchical church so defines." The initial weapon of the counter-reform was based in doctrine and theology. But when that proved ineffective, the Jesuits looked to the use of force and developed a network of spies and assassins. At some point, they established a secret oath for those who reached the higher levels of the order. The Jesuit Oath has been known for more than 200 years and remains a point of controversy, with some questioning its very existence. Nevertheless, the oath has been published repeatedly in books and articles and can be found among the records of the Library of Congress and in the National Library of Australia. While the full oath is much longer, here we include those parts that might be considered the most important. It begins with a Jesuit superior speaking to a younger initiate who is already a Jesuit priest but is now brought under what is called the fourth vow of the order.
My son, heretofore you have been taught to act the dissembler, but you have not yet been invested with all that is necessary to command in the army of Loyola. For none can command here who has not consecrated his labors with the blood of the heretic. For without shedding of blood, no man can be saved. Therefore, repeat after me. I, now, in the presence of Almighty God, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and to you, my ghostly father, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, declare and swear that His Holiness the Pope is Christ's vice-regent, and that he hath power to depose heretical kings, princes, states, and governments, all being illegal without his sacred confirmation. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth. And when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet, as I at any time may be directed so to do by any agent of the Pope or Superior of the Society of Jesus. Go ye then into all the world and take possession of all lands in the name of the Pope. He who will not accept him as the vicar of Jesus and his vice-regent on earth, let him be accursed and exterminated.
It was the Jesuit ambition to subdue all countries that compelled the order to send missionaries across the world, and eventually into America. In the 19th century, one of the many voices sounding the alarm was a close friend of the Marquis de Lafayette, the famed professor Samuel F.B. Morse, inventor of the telegraph and the Morse code. Morse communicated with Lafayette about the dangers America faced from Rome and her Jesuit priests. He published a book titled Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States in 1841. In it, he warned of the agents of a European plot on American soil. He said, "And who are these agents? They are, for the most part, Jesuits, an ecclesiastical order proverbial through the world for cunning, duplicity, and total want of moral principle. An order so skilled in the arts of deception that even in Catholic countries, in Italy itself, it became intolerable and the people required its suppression." Countless books, essays, and sermons were published in the 19th century, warning about the intentions of Rome and her Jesuit priests against the United States. Most of these works were published by Christian churchmen. Perhaps one of the more interesting titles is from a minister named Elijah Lucas. His book is called Shall Liberty Die or Patriots to the Front? Published in 1897, the book warned that the anti-Christian power is now at work in undermining the institutions and destroying the liberties of this great and free and prosperous nation. In the 20th century, the warnings continued. An ex-Catholic priest named Emmett McLaughlin wrote a number of books warning about the activities of the Catholic hierarchy, including a book on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, where he blamed the Vatican and the Jesuit order. At one point, he wrote, "The Roman Catholic Church was deliberately and culpably involved in the assassination of President Lincoln." Meanwhile, when writing of the society and its methods of murder, he said, "The Jesuits became the true cloak and dagger hatchet men of the Vatican, a deadly papal mafia."
Soon after the assassination of President Lincoln, all fingers seemed to point in the direction of a Jesuit conspiracy to assassinate President Lincoln, and soon after, our Congress acted to revoke all diplomatic ties with the Vatican. So even at the heart of American governance, we saw the effect and influence that the Jesuit order was having.
Yet Lincoln is not the only president the Jesuits were accused of killing. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, retired Brigadier General Herbert C. Holdridge sent a letter to the Attorney General of the state of Texas, in which he claimed that the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald were part of a conspiracy that involved Vice President Lyndon Johnson. He said, "These murders were plotted by Vatican Jesuit forces." The letter was dated November 27, 1963, less than a week after the death of President Kennedy. Furthermore, some find it suspicious that Lee Harvey Oswald was invited by the Jesuit order to give a lecture at their Spring Hill College just 4 months before the assassination of JFK. It is reported that Oswald had a cousin who was a Jesuit and invited him to speak, sending him a letter to thank him afterwards. Meanwhile, ex-CIA agent E. Howard Hunt, made famous during the Watergate trials, publicly acknowledged that the Jesuits are, in fact, an intelligence network that has worked with the CIA.
And I would presume to trace the lines of authority within the Catholic Church, how they get their information, what they do. But we've always said, in an admiring way, that the Jesuits form the greatest intelligence service in the world. Always have.
An intelligence service that can be traced to some of the most subversive movements in American history, including the coronavirus pandemic of 2020. The lead figure in the COVID-19 drama, Dr. Anthony Fauci, admits he is a well-trained Jesuit.
Well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My father is a pharmacist, so I had some exposure to the health issue, but I don't think that was the major thing leading me into medicine. It was mostly training in high school and college by the Jesuits, who taught humanities, classics, Greek, Latin.
Most of the world has come to know Dr. Fauci over the last 3 years, but he was what I call a poster boy for the Jesuit educational system, which is not your traditional educational system. They are very agenda-driven. One of their mantras is the end justifies the means.
With Fauci, we discover that Dr. Deborah Birx is also closely associated with the order. She was originally sworn into her office standing beside a Jesuit priest who was described as a longtime family friend. He also gave the invocation.
I understand originally that Dr. Birx had requested that Pope Francis give this invocation. But he was a little occupied, so I was sent instead.
Similar connections can be shown with Dr. Robert Redfield, head of the CDC during COVID, who was Jesuit trained at Georgetown University. And then there's Bill Gates with his then wife Melinda, who had a Jesuit priest in their family, while their foundation gives millions of dollars a year to Jesuit education programs. The connection with Rome was specifically noted by Dr. Brian Ardis, who gained national attention warning America about the use of the drug remdesivir to treat COVID-19.
I knew right away from the Gilead study conducted 2 months earlier that the entire kidney failure, multiple organ failure, was a result of remdesivir and had nothing to do with the virus.
In an online interview, Dr. Ardis gave his opinion on the role of Rome and COVID-19.
But I am concerned that no one is acknowledging who the real threat is. I actually think the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope Francis, is over this entire thing. And I think he's manipulating, controlling the entire narrative. I think he's got Anthony Fauci in his pocket. I think he's got Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Francis Collins. I think all of them are being controlled by a division of the Roman Catholic Church called the Order of the Jesuits, whose sole mission for the last 200 years I'm aware of, since 1857, they have been plotting to destroy the Constitution of the United States.
Dr. Ardis then goes on to warn about the issue of open borders, as promoted by Joe Biden, who is shown here being sworn into office on a copy of the Jesuits' Douay Rheims Bible, a symbol of the Counter-Reformation. Biden himself attends a Jesuit church in Washington, D.C.
Well, what is Joe Biden doing? He opened up the borders, let people flood in. It's exactly what the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church have always wanted. So, and if you don't realize what the religion of Mexico is, who's flooding our borders right now from the south, it is Catholic. In the Catholic doctrines, they have stated that we need to flood America with Catholics.
Illegal immigration is a form of social justice, according to Rome.
There was a document that was published, it was put out by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in conjunction with the Mexican Conference of Catholic Bishops. And it's called Strangers No Longer Together on a Journey of Hope. And it was basically a position paper of the Roman Catholic Church on facilitating mass illegal immigration into the United States. And it was like, hey, y'all come on up here. That's basically what the Roman Catholic bishops and the Mexican bishops were talking about in this paper. And of course, you're seeing the actual results of that right now.
Former federal police officer Doug Thornton served 10 years with the Department of Homeland Security. Much of his time was spent on the Mexican border. We asked him to comment about the role of the Catholic Church and their involvement in illegal immigration.
You have entities like almost every Catholic church, and to include the Red Cross, that are all sponsored by the Vatican, controlled by the Vatican. They are the main culprits in moving people. It's always been a Catholic church shows up somewhere at midnight with a van when we got, a busload or two of illegals, and then they come and pick them up and they drive them away because they are helping the government with repurposing these people, bringing them to other places. They're bringing these people across the border, and then they're funneling them all over the United States.
While the problems of illegal immigration seem to be of recent origin, most Americans are largely unaware that the plan to invade the United States through Mexico is one that dates back to the American Civil War. In his book on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Emmett McLaughlin even warned about the issue in a chapter titled "Conspiracy South of the Border." One of the most controversial chapters in all of American history involves the time of the Civil War, the climax of which was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. While the events surrounding Lincoln's death are well known, it is the truth about the conspirators and what motivated them to commit their crime that some argue has been suppressed in modern times. The American Civil War is said to this day to have been the bloodiest war in American history. Historians have written about the terrible havoc of death, with the shrieks of the wounded and dying, how the soldiers fell in battle as grain falls before a reaper. Men on both sides were subjected to murderous fire, so much so it appeared to some that only mutual extermination would put a stop to the awful carnage. Such are the descriptions of historians, both past and present. Most historians estimate that over 600,000 men perished during the struggle. Many of them fell in battle. while others died of disease and also as prisoners of war. It was a conflict that divided the nation. While we are told that slavery was the key issue, how is it that the war began when Abraham Lincoln had no intention of abolishing the slave trade? The answer may be in the role played by the powers of Rome during the conflict. One of the leading figures of the time was a Catholic priest and personal friend of Abraham Lincoln, a man named Charles Chineke. According to Chineke, the plot to kill Lincoln was instigated by the Jesuit order.
The man who kills Abraham Lincoln will be an immortal.
You start scratching anybody who is connected to the assassination of Lincoln, you're going to find Jesuits. You're going to find people who were Jesuits, people who were related to Jesuits, people who were connected to Jesuits, people under the authority of Jesuits. It's a Jesuit plot.
Chineke wrote that the Jesuit assassin Booth murdered Lincoln the 14th of April, 1865 at 10 o'clock p.m. He went on to say that Booth was nothing but the tool of the Jesuits. It was Rome who directed his arm after corrupting his heart and damning his soul. He said that horrible crime was the work of popery. And after 20 years of constant and most difficult researches, I come fearlessly today before the American people to say and prove that the President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the priests and the Jesuits of Rome. The testimony of Chineke was recorded in his book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, where he detailed his life as a Catholic priest and how he also became the friend of Abraham Lincoln.
In this book, we learn a lot about the Jesuits and a little more about Lincoln himself and about the assassination of Lincoln. Because of Chineke, we have an insight into a lot of background concerning even Lincoln in the days and what the Jesuits were doing in the days of Abraham Lincoln.
Charles Chineke was originally from Canada, where he was ordained a Catholic priest in 1833. During his time in Quebec, he was dedicated to opposing alcohol abuse and became known as the Apostle of Temperance. He would later immigrate to the United States, where he would become the founder of St. Anne, Illinois. The memory of his influence is still preserved in St. Anne to this day. In modern times, his writings, which have inspired much debate, have been defended by a fellow Canadian.
Well, I read Charles Chineke's autobiography, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, way back in 1986. And I was so startled, so intrigued by his stunning allegation of the involvement of a powerful religious organization in the murder of Abraham Lincoln. And I remember looking at this book and thinking, wow, what a thing to say. And wondered who this man, Charles Chineke, was. And so I started to do research.
Canadian author Paul Sarup would spend more than 20 years investigating the story of Charles Chineke, and especially his claims concerning Lincoln and the American Civil War. His research was published in the book, Who Killed Abraham Lincoln, where he reveals much about the historic character of Chineke himself.
He was an accomplished, celebrated clergyman, born in 1809, the same year as Abraham Lincoln. He gained worldwide fame and influence during his lifetime. When he died, his obituary, for instance, was on the front page of the New York Times, and it was reported around the English-speaking world. He was born in Quebec, a Roman Catholic, but he was raised as such, but uniquely in that he also learned and came to know God's Word, as his father had a French Bible. He then went on to become a Roman Catholic priest. And thanks to his remarkable eloquence, he'd persuaded about half of Quebec to give up drinking. And most Quebec families had a portrait of him in their household.
In his book, Chineke says he first met Lincoln in the year 1856, when he was being falsely accused by a fellow Catholic named Peter Spink. According to Chineke's account, the controversy was stirred up by a powerful bishop named Anthony O'Regan of Chicago. Supposedly, he was angry at Chineke, who had challenged his authority and sought revenge through Peter Spink. The controversy ultimately landed in a court in Urbana, Illinois, where Chineke was defended by Abraham Lincoln, who was a respected lawyer at the time.
There in Urbana, Lincoln defended Chineke in 2 court actions brought by a prominent Catholic resident of the area named Peter Spink. So he defended him in 2 court actions. One of them was the most high-profile libel case in Lincoln's career. And incidentally, as I state in my book, at this point of time, the celebrated apostle of temperance fame in 1856, however, was such that the slander suit in which Abraham Lincoln defended him attracted large crowds of people who attended because Chineke was involved, not Lincoln. So interestingly, it was actually Chineke who was better known than Lincoln, though certainly at this time, Lincoln was a distinguished and accomplished lawyer. In the fall of 1856, with Lincoln's help, the case was won, and Chineke said that ultimately the Bishop of Chicago was behind it, and with the bishops of the world really supporting him.
According to Chineke's written account, Lincoln recognized that the Canadian priest had been wrongly persecuted by the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. But the victory against Rome compelled Chineke to give Abraham Lincoln a warning.
Well, at the conclusion of the trial in Urbana in 1856, Chineke said he was crying, and Lincoln said to him, well, why are you crying? I mean, you should be very happy. But Chineke said that he had seen some 10 or 12 Jesuits in the courthouse. Chineke said that he could see Lincoln's sentence of death in their eyes. He says Lincoln became more solemn and said, I know the Jesuits never forget nor forsake, but man must not care how and where he dies, provided he dies at the post of honor and duty.
When I read the words that Chineke wrote about Abraham Lincoln's words, they match what I understand of his speech so well, it's hard not to see. And we said, what reason would he have to lie about it? It cost him so greatly.
Yeah.
It cost him so greatly.
It's a matter of historic record that he was the friend of Lincoln.
Yeah, it's a matter of historical record. But people say his quotes are not real and stuff. Or the Jesuits probably say his quotes are not real. But the truth is, they represent Lincoln so well, and they represent history so well, and again, they cost him greatly to make those statements. So I found the only reason to believe that what he said was pretty accurate.
He also knew Lincoln while he was president in the White House.
Yes, he did.
Did he not warn Abraham Lincoln that he was going to be assassinated?
Yes, and Lincoln's response is so famous, I have to say it. I know that the Jesuits never forget nor forsake, but a man must not care how or where he dies, provided he dies at the post of honor and duty. Whoa.
Yeah.
That is amazing that a person would say that that's what matters. He didn't run and hide like a lot of people. He stood right there in the middle of it. People can say anything they want to about Lincoln, about anything else, but from this, dude, this man was a man.
Despite Chineke's initial warning, it would be years before the opposition of Rome would be more fully realized. Once the Civil War began, the Southern Confederacy was linked to the interests of the Vatican and the Catholic bishops of America. The Jesuits were well known as slave owners and took the side of the Confederacy. In fact, Chineke quoted Abraham Lincoln, who said that, "From the beginning of our Civil War, there has been not a secret, but a public alliance between the Pope of Rome and Jeff Davis. The Pope and his Jesuits have advised, supported, and directed Jeff Davis on the land from the first gunshot at Fort Sumter by the rabid Roman Catholic Beauregard." Indeed, General Pierre G.T. Beauregard was just one of many Catholic leaders involved on the Confederate side of the war. Meanwhile, Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederate States, was an Episcopalian but had been educated at a Dominican's boys' school in Springfield, Kentucky. From an early age, he was sympathetic to Roman Catholics. One of his closest advisors was a Catholic priest named Father John Bannon, who would later become a Jesuit. He was enlisted by Davis to lead a diplomatic mission on behalf of the Confederacy to gain official recognition from the Pope. But according to Lincoln, the person who convinced the Vatican to support the Southern cause was Bishop John Hughes, the Archbishop of New York. While pretending to support the Union, Bishop Hughes went to Rome and advised the Pope to recognize the legitimacy of the Southern Republic.
The only nation in the world that recognized the Southern Confederacy with its cornerstone of slavery was the Vatican. Chineke said this was shown by the 1863 letter of Pope Pius IX to Jefferson Davis, whom the Pope addressed as the President of the Confederate States of America. Chineke reported that he visited Lincoln 3 times in the White House, and he and the President talked about this letter, and Lincoln agreed that it was a recognition of the Southern Confederacy by the papacy. The New York Times also indicated its agreement with Chineke in an 1876 article with the title, "How the Pope Recognized the Southern Confederacy," his letter to Jeff Davis.
The role of Catholic Confederates during the war has been a topic of surprise to a modern audience, but was well known to those involved in the conflict at the time. According to Chineke, Abraham Lincoln said, "I feel more and more every day that it is not against the Americans of the South alone I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his perfidious Jesuits, and their blind and bloodthirsty slaves, than against the real American Protestants that we have to defend ourselves." Yet Chineke was not the only witness from that era who recognized the role of the Vatican in both the war and the killing of Lincoln. Thomas Maley Harris, who was both a medical doctor and Major General in the Union Army, also published a book titled "Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln." General Harris served as the commander for the 10th West Virginia Volunteers during the Civil War. Afterwards, he was one of the military commanders who was appointed to the committee to investigate the assassination of Lincoln, and also to try the conspirators for the crime. As such, General Harris had virtually all of the first-hand information about the plot to kill Lincoln in the months that followed the event. General Harris documented evidence that the key conspirators, including Mary Surratt, whose boarding house provided the location for planning the crime, along with her son, John Surratt, a former Confederate spy during the war, were both devout Roman Catholics, motivated by their loyalty to the Confederacy and were referred to by Harris as, quote, zealous slaves of the Pope, and clearly proven by the evidence given before the commission to have been leading and active members of the conspiracy. He also mentions the most notorious of them, John Wilkes Booth. He writes that Booth, the ringleader, was born and reared a Protestant. He was only a nominal Protestant, however. Under the influence of his associations in the conspiracy plot, he had become a pervert to Catholicism. It was found that he was wearing a Catholic medal under his vest and over his heart. The wily Jesuit had been able to pervert him to Catholicism and to deceive him into the belief that his medal would conduce to his personal safety and to the success of the enterprise. Charles Chineke argued that Booth had been thoroughly indoctrinated by Jesuit philosophy, which teaches that any leader who refused to obey the Pope was denounced as a tyrant and could be killed. This appears to be the reason why Booth shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, after he leaped to the stage in Ford's Theater. Jacob Thompson of Mississippi was the former Secretary of the Interior, who resigned his office to serve in the Confederacy. He is remembered as a Confederate secret agent in Canada. About him, General Harris tells us that Thompson used the Jesuitical argument that to kill a tyrant was no murder, and so, assuming that President Lincoln was a tyrant, it would be a glorious and praiseworthy act to take him off. Mary Surratt was captured and ultimately condemned for her part in the conspiracy. After her trial, she was hanged along with the other conspirators. But her son, John Surratt, escaped on the night of the assassination and was smuggled with the help of Catholic priests through Canada and out of the country. His image was shown on some of the original wanted posters next to John Wilkes Booth. But Surratt was discovered sometime later, we are told at the door of Rome, enrolled under the banners of the Pope in the 9th Company of his Zouaves under the false name of Watson. This historic image shows John Surratt dressed in the uniform of a papal Zouave, a member of the Pope's army dedicated to defending the Papal States. Despite his initial escape, once Surratt was discovered, he was arrested and brought back to America to stand trial for the murder of Abraham Lincoln. But historians tell us that the jury was compromised, and in spite of overwhelming evidence, a conviction could not be obtained.
In the end, charged with murder and conspiring to murder the president, despite the preponderance of evidence showing his guilt, the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. And Charles Chineke alleged the reason John Surratt was not convicted was because the Catholics on the jury refused to find him guilty, despite the evidence, just as years earlier, a Catholic member of a jury refused to acquit Chineke in his court battle with Peter Spink. Academic Kate Clifford Larson commented in her book, The Assassin's Accomplice, Mary Surratt and the Plot to Kill Abraham Lincoln, saying, much more evidence was introduced shedding light on the extensiveness of the conspiracy as well as new details about Mary's complicity in it. But despite the new evidence, John's case ended in a mistrial. The civilian jury was packed with Southern sympathizers. All charges were then dropped because the statute of limitations of 2 years on a charge of treason had passed, and in February 1868, John was set free. And after that, he taught for several years at a Catholic school in Maryland. He died in 1916, And when he died, a solemn high requiem mass was offered at St. Pius Catholic Church in Baltimore. And this was an unusual honor for a man who was charged and never found innocent of conspiring to murder America's greatest president, and one whose own lawyer stated he was guilty of at least conspiring to be part of a plan to kidnap the president. This mass would be reserved for the funerals of bishops, priests, and nuns. When offered at the funeral of a layman, it would be a token of appreciation for exceptional devotion or service to the church. And it remains a question today, what could that service have been?
Yet according to General Thomas Maley Harris, the killing of Lincoln was only part of Rome's plan against America. The Jesuits and Catholic hierarchy worked with the powers of Europe in an attempt to provide aid to the Southern Confederates through a French army that would invade Mexico and take control of the country in order to establish what General Harris called a Roman Catholic Empire in Mexico, with their own monarch, an Austrian prince named Maximilian I. The European plot was said to be the work of Pope Pius IX in Rome, along with the Emperor Napoleon III of France. Charles Chineke made the same argument in his later work titled 40 Years in the Church of Christ. He said, during the Civil War, the French Emperor Napoleon and the Pope conceived the idea that there was a good opportunity to establish an empire in Mexico. The expectation was that such an empire would be a great Roman power in this continent and be likely to become part of the slave and Romish nation to be founded on the ruins of the Republic of the United States and the ultimate control of North America. Did Abraham Lincoln blame Rome for the American Civil War?
Yes, he did. Chineke visited Lincoln 3 times. He visited his friend 3 times in the White House, and they talked about things like the Civil War. And I can quote Chineke saying what he said Lincoln said. And Lincoln said, "This war would have never been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuit. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons." Though there were great differences between the South and the North on the question of slavery, neither Jeff Davis nor any one of the leading men of the Confederacy would have dared to attack the North had they not relied on the promises of the Jesuits that under the mask of democracy, the money and the arms of the Roman Catholics, even the arms of France, were at their disposal if they would attack us.
Modern historians often overlook that a French army did invade Mexico in 1862 during the American Civil War. The French attempted to take control of the country, but were stopped short at the historic Battle of Puebla on May the 5th, where the Mexican army defeated the French and halted their advance. The Battle of Puebla is celebrated every year during Cinco de Mayo. Yet in time, the French would succeed in capturing Mexico and installed their European monarch, Maximilian I, as the ruler. But his reign was short-lived, as the United States sent aid to help the Mexican fighters defeat the French. Ultimately, Maximilian was deposed and executed by a Mexican firing squad. Yet because of all the intrigues with Rome and the evidence that the Jesuits were behind the assassination of Lincoln, the United States cut off diplomatic relations with the Vatican in the year 1867, a decision that stood for 117 years, until the Reagan administration in 1984. Mount Vernon today preserves the memory of the man who could be called America's most well-known ancestor. While much is remembered about George Washington on the fields of battle and enduring the winter at Valley Forge, a lesser-known history is his role as the spy master for American resistance. The Mount Vernon website today features an article on the subject with a quote from a British intelligence officer who said, "Washington did not really outfight the British. He simply outspied us." Perhaps the most controversial topic in modern America is the hidden activity of what is commonly called the deep state in our political system. Made up of shadowy figures who are part of a secret government in the United States, operatives whose identities are generally unknown, and yet their influence seems to be the real control behind decisions being made, even when the policies oppose American law or the will of the American people. The deceptions of the deep state have compelled many Americans to investigate and to wonder, what will the end result of these things be? Is America headed for a time of tyranny? Or perhaps a future inquisition?
Police department, third floor! Open the door!
And could it be that those who controlled the first Dark Age will be responsible for the second? In 2014, the Boston Globe published an article with the headline, "Vote All You Want, the Secret Government Won't Change." The article focused on the book, National Security and Double Government, by Professor Michael J. Glennon. In it, we are told that the author, quote, catalogs the ways that the defense and national security apparatus is effectively self-governing, with virtually no accountability, transparency, or checks and balances of any kind. Glennon himself is a professor of law at Tufts University and has worked as legal counsel for a variety of congressional committees and the State Department. His book is based on his own experience. Here he explains his views on what he means by double government.
We have developed a bifurcated set of institutions. One set for public show and a second set that operates behind the scenes in the realm of national security. And I underscore that. I'm talking about in the realm of national security. The public institutions of the presidency, the Congress, and the courts, what I call the Madisonian institution, which the people in this country believe run, define, manage American national security policy. But in fact, that policy is managed behind the scenes by a network of several hundred managers. The people believe that the Madisonian institutions are in charge, but it is in fact the so-called Trumanite network, as I call it, that traces back to the Truman administration when the great transfer of power began, that actually call the shots.
According to Professor Glennon, the Trumanite network is made up of the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and to a lesser extent, the State Department. But how did a government designed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people arrive in this condition? And who is controlling this secret network operating behind the scenes? Perhaps the chief clue is found in the fact that the spies for the Central Intelligence Agency are said to be trained at the Jesuits' Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Georgetown University is the principal Jesuit university in the United States of America. It's right in Washington, D.C. And of course, there are a lot of very powerful people, very well-known people, people that are high in American government that have been students at Georgetown University. One of the ones that, of course, comes to mind immediately is Bill Clinton.
There is a book from 1996 called First in His Class by David Moranis, a biography of Bill Clinton. And it tells about a 24-year-old Jesuit who wasn't yet ordained a priest, but he was teaching an introductory philosophy course, and Clinton was in it. And in it, he talked about three kinds of people. People who see everything as black and white. Then there's the second kind of people who see everything as unclear. And the third is the people called the analogical, who see clarity within complexity. So it's kind of this in-between thing. And he saw this in Bill Clinton. And remember, Jesuits are always looking for more Jesuits. They're looking for people who think like a Jesuit. So you got to hear this. He saw an analogical mind at work in the essays of 18-year-old Bill Clinton. One day after class, Hentz invited Clinton out for dinner. And as they sat across from each other in a booth, Hentz sipping a beer, Clinton engulfing a hamburger, the teacher began making a sales pitch for the Jesuit order. He talked about how Jesuits got an exemption from the Pope to be active in politics, retelling his favorite joke, that Jesuits say the missing line in creation is, then God created politics and saw that politics is good. I think you should seriously consider becoming a Jesuit, he said to Clinton. I've been impressed with your papers.
The Jesuit who met with Clinton was the Reverend Otto Hentz, a theology professor at Georgetown for more than 40 years. He is shown here interviewing Bill Clinton in 2015.
What does going to Georgetown mean to you?
I was here with fascinating people. I was here at a fascinating time, but it affected me mostly because of the teachers I had. I doubt very seriously if I ever would have become president had I not come to Georgetown.
He became aligned with globalists and set up. They literally set him up.
So then do you believe that Bill Clinton's path into globalism was through the Jesuit order?
Oh, yes. Here, listen to this. In 2000, September 26th, I accidentally stumbled on the pages sitting live at the government printing office online. I don't know if you can still do that or not, but I was happy to find it. This is from a speech, okay? September 26, 2000. He said, I'd like to thank the faculty and staff and students who are here and all the members of my administration and administrations past who are here and my friends from Georgetown days who are here. Georgetown Law School has given more talent to this administration than any other single institution in America. And I'm almost afraid to mention some for fear that I'll ignore others or admit them anyway. But among the people in the administration who are Georgetown law grads are my Chief of Staff, John Podesta, my White House Counsel, Beth Nolan, my Deputy Counsel, Bruce Lindsay, former White House Counsel, Jack Quinn, Budget Director, Jack Lew, former Trade Ambassador and Commerce Secretary, Mickey Cantor, Counselor to the Chief of Staff, Michelle Ballantyne, Deputy Communications Director, Stephanie Cutter. They're all graduates of Georgetown Law, and I've had various ambassadors and other appointees, and Lord knows what else you gave me. So I'm grateful for that. It's also quite interesting to me that Beth Nolan's assistant, Ben Adams, and my personal aide, Doug Band, are also actually working full-time at the White House. Later on, he says, I also want to credit one other person for the remarkable fidelity Georgetown students and Georgetown lawyers have had to public service over the years, my freshman philosophy teacher, Father Otto Hentz. So he has this major indebtedness to the Jesuit order.
It is worth noting that Clinton graduated from Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service, named after Edmund Walsh, a well-known Jesuit priest who founded the School of Foreign Service back in 1919 after the First World War. He is shown here with General Douglas MacArthur during World War II. Walsh was also known as an anti-communist and was called Joe McCarthy's Jesuit, since it was he who is said to have manipulated the McCarthy campaign against communism in the United States.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. One communist among the American advisors at Yalta was one communist too many. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, there could still be one communist too many.
McCarthy's Inquisition-style approach is well known, but the Jesuit influence behind him is more obscure. McCarthy was Jesuit educated at Marquette University. His famous meeting with Walsh in January of 1950 at the Colony Restaurant in Washington, D.C. is said to be the birth of McCarthyism. But what was the real purpose of Edmund Walsh, considering that his fellow Jesuits helped to create communism back in the 19th century? Is it possible that Walsh used McCarthy for the purpose of controlled opposition? In the book, America, The Last Best Hope, conservative author William Bennett gives his analysis of the damaging influence of the McCarthy movement. He writes that, worst of all, McCarthy besmirched the honorable cause of anti-communism. He discredited legitimate efforts to counter Soviet subversion of American institutions. From this point on, it would only be necessary for disloyal people or groups to yell McCarthyism to distract public attention from real problems. The Walsh School of Foreign Service continues to educate world leaders in the same globalist tradition begun by Edmund Walsh and continued through men like Bill Clinton.
There is no longer a clear division between what is foreign and what is domestic. The world economy, the world environment, the world AIDS crisis, the world arms race, they affect us all. Today, as an old order passes, the new world is more free but less stable. Communism's collapse has called forth old animosities and new dangers. Clearly, America must continue to lead the world we did so much to make.
Bill Clinton was a student at Georgetown University. He's a graduate of Georgetown University. And again, there are many others. And I mean, the fact that they've got that Jesuit school right in the nation's capital, that's not an accident. That's something that is done intentionally. And of course, they train many, many people.
The city of Georgetown itself is often seen as a city of spies, due to the fact that many of the CIA's intelligence agents had lived there, along with spies from governments around the world. Georgetown University is the Jesuit headquarters in the United States, featuring a statue of the order's founder, Ignatius Loyola. Nearby is another statue of the university's founder, John Carroll. John Carroll was the first Catholic bishop of the American hierarchy. Beforehand, Catholic bishops were forbidden on American soil due to their history of subversive activities in Protestant countries. Samuel Adams wrote about this in his famous work, The Rights of the Colonists, 1772. In examining the teachings of John Locke on the subject of toleration, he said the following: "Toleration ought to be extended to all whose doctrines are not subversive of society. Excluded from such toleration are those who teach doctrines subversive of the civil government under which they live. The Roman Catholics or Papists are excluded by reason of such doctrines as these, that princes excommunicated may be deposed, and those that they call heretics may be destroyed without mercy. Besides their recognizing the Pope in so absolute a manner, in subversion of government, by introducing imperium in imperio, leading directly to the worst anarchy and confusion, civil discord, war, and bloodshed." The Latin phrase imperium in imperio means a state within a state, or a hidden government operating inside the established government. Before he signed the Declaration of Independence, Sam Adams declared, "This day, I trust, the reign of political Protestantism will commence." We asked Dr. Ronald Cook to comment on America's Protestant heritage. Was America founded as a Protestant country?
Yes, it certainly was. And you don't have, when they went forward to sign, there was only one Roman Catholic there at that point in time. And as many people have pointed out, the population of early America was about 99% Protestant. The Jews were almost unheard of, and Romanists too. And in fact, the early colonies, they tried to stop Roman Catholics from coming in. I saw that man on TV talking there one time, that O'Donnell fella. They said, they were even trying to stop us there early on from even coming into this country and all. He was railing against the Protestants there. Of course they did. They tried to stop the Jesuits from coming in too. But it failed because after a while, your people are not all Christian, like they were early on. I believe most of the early colonists that came there to what's Massachusetts now, no, they were all basically Christian people, truly Christian, not just a name. But as more people came, then you get people that are not. But the thing is, you have to, if you're a true believer, I believe, you have to contend earnestly for the faith once and for all, delivered not to the professors, not to the ministers, not to the teachers, but to the saints, the ordinary, everyday Christian. If he's a true believer, he must be a contender. Otherwise, he doesn't truly believe. If you believe in something, you're going to contend for it. Otherwise, you don't really count it as that important. And that's what happened.
In an article titled "From Georgetown to Langley, the Controversial Connection Between the Prestigious University and the CIA," author Alan MacLeod writes, "If you have ever wondered, where do America's spies come from? The answer is quite possibly the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. The school provides the backbone for the Central Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, State Department, and other organs of the national security state. With more than 24 ex-CIA officials among its teaching staff, the school tailors its courses towards producing the next generation of analysts, assassins, coup plotters, and economic hitmen. To this day, the national security state is filled with Georgetown graduates. This includes no less than 5 former CIA directors. To understand how the Jesuits achieved such influence, we must consider that not all those who are called Jesuits are necessarily priests. Many Jesuits operate in secret and often appear in a variety of professions in society. Do all Jesuits appear to be priests?
Not at all. In fact, only a certain number end up as priests. There's so many filtration systems on the way to becoming a priest. Many of them are coadjutors, formed coadjutors. That's a type 2 class, second class. And that means they can either be spiritual coadjutors, which means they can hear confessions, but they can't go a whole lot beyond that. There's some things they can do, but most they cannot. And then there's the temporal coadjutors, and those are the ones you got to watch out for. They may be your janitor. They may be a librarian, college professor, public relations, any number of things. No SJ, nothing to tell you that they're actually Jesuits, but they're full Jesuits, just not priests.
I guess you can be educated by the Jesuits and consider yourself more or less a lay Jesuit. A man wrote to me, and he said his mother was a lay Jesuit. And he mentioned other people, like I'm a lay member of a church, where you wouldn't be the clergyman in the church, but you would be a member of it.
In a book called The Papal System, first published in the year 1872, 19th century minister William Cathcart writes on the history of the papacy and the Jesuits in particular. He says, a Jesuit might be a leading Protestant, a prominent politician, the wife of a cabinet officer, a servant in a family. Anything, anywhere. They are everywhere in every guise. Such claims about the secret spies and operatives of the order are not unique. Even John Adams, who often warned of Jesuit intrigues, in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, wrote the following. He said, I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. They have a general now in Russia, in correspondence with the Jesuits in the U.S., who are more numerous than everybody knows. Shall we not have swarms of them here, in the shape of printers, editors, writers, schoolmasters, etc.? If ever a congregation of men could merit eternal perdition, on earth and in hell, it is this company of Loyola. Nineteenth-century priest Charles Chineke warned that the Catholic bishops of America had a plan to take control of the U.S. government using covert methods.
Chineke reported that he was invited to go to a large meeting of priests in Buffalo, New York in 1852. And at this meeting, he heard of a plan to mass Roman Catholics in the large cities of the United States to take political control of the country and to make a way for the time when, as he said, not a single senator or member of Congress will be chosen if he be not submitted to our Holy Father, the Pope, and when Catholics will not only elect the president, but fill and command the armies, man the navies, and hold the keys to the public treasury. Well, currently, Roman Catholics hold all or almost all of the key positions of power in the United States. Catholics have been increasingly viewed by United States politicians as an influential bloc of voters to be courted. The Catholic magazine, The Tablet, declared back in 2003 that Catholics in America now represent the most important shifting demographic for the vote. Senator Joe Biden, a Roman Catholic, was picked by Barack Obama to be his 2008 running mate, in part because of Biden's connection with Catholic voters. And of course, now Biden is the president.
To understand how Rome and the Jesuits gained the upper hand in the American deep state, we must study the foundations of the CIA and how the American intelligence system was established during the Second World War. During the war, then President Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Office of Strategic Services, the first official intelligence arm of the U.S. government. FDR chose as the sole leader of this new department a former classmate from Columbia Law School, an Irish Catholic named William Donovan. Donovan was also known as Wild Bill because of his exploits during World War I. He was given complete authority over the new spy network proposed by the president. Furthermore, Donovan was answerable to no one but FDR. Former Special Forces operator Dino Garner writes that books have been written about Donovan's exploits, a heroic warfighter and the architect and driving force behind the OSS. What those books don't share is that Donovan was a well-trained Irish Jesuit who played dirty at nearly every turn. His tactics and strategies were second to none, simply because the Jesuits use a no-holds-barred approach to fighting their enemies. Garner goes on to say, the guys who wrote Donovan's field manuals were also high-ranking Jesuits who'd been trained in the art of warfare. While the OSS was controversial, some of America's prominent figures served in Donovan's spy network. Perhaps most interesting was Julia Child, the woman made famous for her dynamic cooking show. Yet those who watched her were largely unaware that during the war, she worked as a spy for Donovan and the OSS. With her were men like Catholic film director John Ford, who was famous for his many productions with American icon John Wayne. Ford also served in the OSS. He even created training films for Donovan, including this one, where he appears as an OSS officer.
Now, we'll give you all the dope you require about this El Porto area, but just don't read it. Absorb it.
Okay, if you want to waste time. But I tell you, I know El Porto like a book.
Perhaps the enemy has added a couple of chapters since you've left.
Aye, aye, sir.
The film shows how an overconfident agent can make mistakes. It was just one of many projects Ford produced for the OSS, and shows the connection between the intelligence community and the entertainment industry from the beginning. Other notable agents were men like actor Sterling Hayden, Chicago White Sox player Mo Berg, the historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., and even Henry Ringling North of the Ringling Brothers circus fame. The relationship between Hollywood and the CIA has continued since the time of Donovan, having influenced countless films. As shown by the documentary Theaters of War, How the Pentagon and the CIA Took Hollywood. In the film, Dr. Matthew Alford claims that what we found is that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of products have been affected and are often rewritten at script level by the national security state in the United States. Some believe that Hollywood movies are really a modern version of what was known as Jesuit theater in centuries past, where the order communicated ideas through dramatic plays. The book, Jesuit Hollywood by Sean Wilcock, documents how Jesuits used theater as part of the Counter-Reformation to refute the anti-papist dramas inspired by Martin Luther. Wilcock writes that the Jesuits saw the theater as having a very great purpose in their schemes to promote Jesuit religious propaganda to the masses. Far from being a minor instrument for teaching, the Jesuits incorporated the use of dramas, dance, and opera in their schools and missions around the world. In the 20th century, they were even responsible for creating the official production code for making movies in Hollywood. Also called the Hays Code, after Congressman William Hays, it was originally intended to prevent immoral practices from being communicated on film. The code was developed by Catholic publisher Martin Quigley, along with a Jesuit priest named the Reverend Daniel Lord. The code was upheld for some 20 years by a Jesuit-educated Catholic named Joseph Breen, who became the central figure associated with the moral boundaries imposed on the film industry. At one point, Breen was even said to have more influence over world opinion than Hitler, Mussolini, or Stalin because of the tremendous power he had over the content of Hollywood movies. But while the code was done away with, the influence of Rome did not cease. It continued through the American deep state. Researchers continue to investigate what sort of covert propaganda the intelligence community has infused and continues to infuse in Hollywood films. The Jesuit influence at the CIA can be seen in a series of clues. For example, the order was originally known as the Company of Jesus, while the Company is also one of the names given to the CIA, as shown by the book Inside the Company by former CIA operations officer and whistleblower Philip Agee. In the introduction, he reveals that he joined the CIA, quote, after 4 years of Jesuits and 4 at Notre Dame. It is also reported that the CIA is often called the Catholic Intelligence Agency. Most sources give as the reason for this the influence of OSS founder William Donovan, whose statue is found at the CIA headquarters to this day as part of the OSS Memorial. He continues to be seen as the father of modern American intelligence gathering and the unofficial founder of the CIA. But perhaps the most revealing part of Donovan's history is found in the book, The Last Hero by Anthony Cave Brown, where a black and white photo shows Donovan at the Vatican, beside the Pope's Swiss Guards, to receive the Medal of Saint Sylvester, the Vatican's highest award for a lifetime of public and secret services to the Catholic Church.
While Bill Donovan late in life, he actually received a very high award from the Pope. It's called the Order of Sylvester. So the Pope saw fit to crown his lifetime efforts with this very prestigious award. And that is another important tie-in between the CIA and the Roman Church state.
The liberal magazine Mother Jones published an article on Donovan's relationship with the Vatican, titled, "Their Will Be Done." The article shows an illustration with an American politician receiving instructions from a Roman Catholic priest inside a confessional. The obvious suggestion is that the priests control the politicians in a secretive manner. The article further exposes the activities of the historic Knights of Malta, many of whom are members of the CIA. They argue that while the Knights are known for their charitable works, some of their acts included the mass smuggling of some 50,000 Nazi war criminals, who, with the assistance of the International Red Cross, were furnished fake Vatican passports and, in some cases, clerical robes, and were smuggled to South America. Many Nazis were smuggled to Argentina, for centuries known to be a stronghold of the Catholic Church. Cardinal Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis, is a Jesuit from Argentina. In the book, The Secret History of the Jesuits, written by French author Edmond Paris, the connection between the order and Hitler's National Socialist Workers' Party is explained in detail. In his book, Paris even goes so far as to declare that the Vatican was behind both world wars. He writes, "The public is practically unaware of the overwhelming responsibility carried by the Vatican and its Jesuits in the start of the two world wars, a situation which may be explained in part by the gigantic finances at the disposition of the Vatican and its Jesuits, giving them power in so many spheres." Furthermore, Paris documents how it was reported by the French media that Pope Pius XII made Hitler. He came to power not so much through legal means, but because the Pope influenced the Centrum, the German Catholic Party. It was the German Catholic Party, known as the Center Party, that would give to Hitler his absolute power. Before he became Pope, Pius XII was known as Cardinal Pacelli. It was he who had worked for years to initiate the political agreement between the Vatican and Nazi Germany. He had famously signed the Vatican's Concordat in 1933 with Hitler and the Third Reich. Quoting the French media at the time, Edmond Paris writes that the Concordat brought to the National Socialist government, considered nearly everywhere to be made up of usurpers, if not brigands, the seal of an agreement with the oldest international power, the Vatican. In a way, it was the equivalent of a diploma of international honorability.
Their rise to power was based on fraud, deceit, intimidation, and coercion, culminating finally in terror and flame. Into that flame went the democratic constitution of the Weimar Republic and the freedom of the German people.
Edmond Paris also revealed that one of the terms of the Concordat was that the Roman Catholic bishops would need to swear their allegiance to the Nazi government, giving greater credibility to Hitler in the eyes of millions of Catholic citizens. He writes, in July 1933, when the Concordat forced the bishops to swear an oath of allegiance to the Nazi government, the concentration camps were already open. The Vatican was the main force behind the lightning rise of Hitler, who, together with Mussolini and Franco, were but war pawns manipulated by the Vatican and its Jesuits. In 1936, Cardinal Pacelli traveled to America, where he was given an honorary degree by the Jesuits' Fordham University, and then another honorary degree by the Jesuits at Georgetown. The order referred to Pacelli as the Apostle of Peace, Yet he was crowned Pope in March of 1939, and within 6 months, World War II began. In his book, The Vatican Against Europe, Edmund Paris would blame the Second World War on the political craftiness of Rome. Paris himself was a French historian, raised by Catholic parents and educated at the Sorbonne, the leading university in Paris. His writings about genocidal events during the war are even preserved by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Who was Edmund Paris, and did Jack Chick know him personally?
Edmund Paris was an unsaved researcher, but his wife was a Christian. And his wife had contact with Chick Publications and Jack. And his wife so believed in what her husband was doing and his researches about the Catholic Church and the Jesuit order, like the secret history of the Jesuits, that she deeded that stuff over. She said, please publish this, and gave permission to Jack to publish it. That's how we got it. Because this Christian wife of this man, and some say, and I cannot prove it because all the people I could ask are no longer here, that he converted just before he died. I sure hope he did, because he sure has made a great contribution in secret history of the Jesuits.
But Edmund Paris confronted not only Rome's influence with Hitler, but also with Nazi allies in Croatia, known as the Ustashi, whose leader was a notorious war criminal named Ante Pavelic. Edmund Paris documented Ustashi crimes in his book, Genocide in Satellite Croatia. Pavelic is seen here, meeting with Adolf Hitler in 1941. The Ustashi were an alliance of Roman Catholics and Bosnian Muslims who saw the Orthodox Serbian Christians as their enemies. They are perhaps one of the most dreadful companies of genocidal killers in history, whose gruesome murders were said to shock even their Nazi allies.
Yes, well, I have a book, a Time Life book entitled Partisans and Guerrillas. Shows that not just the Jewish people who were persecuted, and it contains really horrific information. It states the Nazis took over Yugoslavia and installed a quote, a vicious homegrown fascist named Ante Pavelic, a longtime advocate of Croatian independence and the founder of a pro-Catholic terrorist organization known as the Ustashi, or rebels. As Hitler's puppet, Pavelic set about eliminating what he called alien elements, Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies. The Serbs comprised approximately 30% of the state of Croatia's population, and nearly all were members of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Pavelic's formula for dealing with the Serbs was simple and brutal. 1/3 were to be expelled to Serbia, 1/3 converted to Catholicism, and 1/3 exterminated. The massacres went on and on. By the time the killing was finally brought to an end, the Ustashi had taken an incredible toll of Serbs, variously estimated at from 350,000 to 750,000.
The supreme apostolic vicar of the Ustashi army was Archbishop Aloysius Stepanak, a Jesuit-educated priest and one of the most controversial figures from the war. Stepanak defined Serbs as renegades from the Catholic Church. He and the Vatican supported the Ustashi movement both during and after the war. He is seen here meeting with Ante Pavelic, whose government was the Croatian parallel to that of Nazi Germany. We read that Pavelic's Ustasha started a reign of terror unprecedented in Balkan history, and in the 4 years killed over 500,000 people. The victims were primarily Serbs in Croatia, as well as Jews and Gypsies. Orthodox Church scholars maintain that Archbishop Stepanak welcomed the religious conversion law of 1941, which obliged the Orthodox Serbs to convert to Roman Catholicism. In fact, this photo, taken from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, shows a group of Serbian civilians who are being forced to convert to Catholicism by the Ustashi. To this day, Orthodox Church historians maintain that Catholic priests, monks, and nuns took the most active part in the genocide of the Orthodox Serbs. Franciscan monks carried out mass executions in the villages of Draculic and Sargovac, where about 2,000 Serbs were slaughtered. This photo shows Ustashi leader Ante Pavelić surrounded by Franciscan monks, who are said to have been some of the worst killers during the genocide. By far the most nefarious was a Franciscan friar named Miroslav Filipovic. He is seen here dressed in his monk's robe on one side, while in his Ustashi uniform on the other. He became the chief guard at the Jasenovac concentration camp and confessed to personally killing at least 100 prisoners. His crimes were done with such wickedness and cruelty that he was nicknamed Fra Satana, which means Brother Satan. For his crimes, Filipovic was executed by hanging after the war. In the book, Croatia under Ante Pavelić by Rob McCormick, the author details the general nature of the atrocities. He says, "The Ustashi reveled in the bloodlust, employing various acts of torture, such as skinning and burning victims alive. Sexual mutilation was widespread and was embraced by the especially wicked. Some Serbs were hacked to pieces with their noses, ears, and tongues cut off."
There's really gruesome details. According to one Italian correspondent, Pavelić once put a wicker basket on his desk filled with 40 pounds of eyes gouged from the victim of the Ustashi. And I comment in my book, during the war, Pope Pius XII met with Pavelić and most assuredly knew what was going on in Yugoslavia. If anyone would have listened to the Pope, wouldn't have been this man who was trying to make his jurisdiction completely Catholic. Why then didn't the Pope tell him to stop the murders, the forced conversions, and other crimes? Was it not because what was going on was nothing new for the papacy and the church?
And of course, when you say the church, you mean the Roman Catholic Church.
The Roman Catholic, yes, that's correct, yeah.
Jasenovac was the most notorious concentration camp in Croatia. In what is called by one author the blackest page of the Ustashi regime, because of the hundreds of thousands who were tortured, raped, and murdered there. 20th century author Avro Manhattan also documented the horrific crimes of Rome's Ustashi. In his book, The Vatican's Holocaust, which is called the sensational account of the most horrifying religious massacre of the 20th century, he writes, "The Vatican was well informed of what was going on inside Ustashi Croatia, not only because the Catholic hierarchy sent the Pope regular reports, but because the Pope had his own personal representative there. The personal representative of Pope Pius XII was Monsignor Giuseppe Marcone, shown here with Ante Pavelić, and also here, seated next to Archbishop Stepanak. Today, the people of the Republic of Serbia maintain a memorial at Jasenovac, remembering more than 700,000 victims of what is often said to be the most cruel and savage chapter of the Second World War. While Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews has been given the greatest attention, authors like Avro Manhattan and Edmund Paris published their works as a warning to future generations. Especially when, as the war came to an end, the Vatican began to look for ways to help those who committed such terrible crimes escape accountability.
The Roman Catholic system was very deeply involved, and the influence of the Jesuits is more easily seen in World War II. But in both wars, the Vatican backed Germany and certain other powers, the purpose being to take control of Europe and the world, as they had often tried to do in the past and had succeeded in doing in Europe, and wanting to do it again, but using the most powerful nation in Europe at the time, which was Germany. And when that failed in World War I, moving on to preparations for World War II. Hitler, as is played down today, but was a Roman Catholic from Austria, a very Jesuit part of the German nation. He had a lot of influence from them, and Hitler actually pretty much fashioned the Gestapo along Jesuit lines, and that's just some of the evidence. There's a lot more, and of course World War II and the pretty much the Jesuit state of Croatia.
Croatia is predominantly Catholic, but has a large share of Orthodox adherents as well. The Ustashi, Pavlovich elite guard, are disintegrating now due to the corruption of their membership and disrepute even in German eyes.
Croatia, which was a Nazi state, but which committed atrocities that at times made the Nazis of Germany look like they were in kindergarten. It was a terrible time, and it was run by a Jesuit, as was Slovakia. So the influence of the Vatican in general, the Jesuits in particular, in these wars is immense.
The Nazi invasion of France is one of the most dramatic events of World War II, and would have been a defining influence in the life of Edmund Paris as a French citizen. He would have been familiar with the legendary French resistance that fought valiantly against Nazi tyranny until their country was fully liberated. Many of the quotes from his books are taken from French publications written during or shortly after the war. His writings could even be seen as a continuation of the fight against Nazism by exposing the powers that were behind it. But he was not alone in his analysis of Rome's involvement. Famed author H.G. Wells accused the Pope of supporting Hitler and of only preaching peace once he wanted to help the Nazis escape accountability. Wells said of the Pope, "The pleas he is now making for peace and forgiveness are manifestly designed to assist the escape of these criminals, so that they may presently launch a fresh assault upon all that is decent in humanity." In the Bible, there are many scriptures that warn against accepting a false peace from a dangerous enemy. In the book of Ezekiel, God warned, "Therefore thus saith the Lord God, because ye have spoken vanity and seen lies, therefore behold, I am against you, because they have seduced my people, saying peace, and there was no peace." Meanwhile, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul warned that the day of the Lord would come as a thief in the night. "For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." The theme of false peace seemed to echo in Europe when Neville Chamberlain famously negotiated with Adolf Hitler, and then returned to England with a peace treaty signed by the Führer.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
The agreement with Hitler would be shattered a short time later at the start of World War II, resulting in the removal of Chamberlain, who was replaced by Winston Churchill. Churchill's uncompromising determination helped to drive the Allied forces during the war.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing ground, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender.
While Churchill's views on God have been debated, it is clear that he saw Protestant England as the historic champion of freedom, fighting against the villain of Romanism. Meanwhile, the evidence of Rome's influence over Hitler and Nazi Germany appears to be undeniable. In the book Hitler Speaks by Hermann Rauschning, the author relates some of the dialogue of Hitler in private conversation. Rauschning claims that Hitler said, quote, "I learned above all from the Jesuits. So did Lenin, for that matter, if I remember rightly. There has been nothing more impressive in the world than the hierarchical organization of the Catholic Church. I have taken over many elements of it in the organization of my party. To have lasted almost 2,000 years under changing fortunes is an achievement." Rauschning's testimony is important because he was a former member of the Nazi Party who got out before the war began and left Germany. In his book, he warned that Hitler and his movement are the apocalyptic riders of world annihilation. There is also the testimony of Walter Schellenberg, one of the highest-ranking members of the Nazi intelligence network. He described the development of the SS under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, who became its highest-ranking member. He said, "The SS organization had been constituted by Himmler according to the principles of the Jesuit order. Their regulations and the spiritual exercises prescribed by Ignatius of Loyola were the model Himmler tried to copy exactly. The Reichsführer SS, Himmler's title as Supreme Chief of the SS, was to be the equivalent of the Jesuits' general." Hitler himself even said, "I see in Himmler our Ignatius de Loyola." Furthermore, Franz von Papen, the man who oversaw the controversial Concordat between Hitler and the Vatican, declared that the Third Reich is the first world power, which not only acknowledges but also puts into practice the high principles of the papacy.
Durch eure Schule wird die ganze Nation gehen. Und ich weiß, so wie ihr in stolzer Ergebenheit.
Furthermore, it is generally agreed that the leading symbol of the entire Nazi movement can be traced to Hitler's Roman Catholic education. We read that Adolf Hitler had been a pupil at the school of Lambach and sang amongst the choir boys in the abbey bearing the same name. He discovered the swastika there, as it was the heraldic sign of Father Hagen, the abbey's administrator. The abbot, Theodoric Hagen, was a 19th century priest who had long since passed away before Hitler attended the school at Lambach Abbey. Yet he left behind his coat of arms, which is said to have captivated the young Adolf. We see the image here with the bishop's mitre, placed like a crown above the emblem. The letters around the symbol stand for Theodoric Hagen, Abbey Lambach. Some of the Nazi connections to Rome are still subjects for debate. According to Edmund Paris, Heinrich Himmler's uncle was said to be a Jesuit and also a leading member of the SS. Yet records of his uncle's history have proven difficult to find. Another Catholic priest, named Father Bernhard Stempfel, was reportedly the ghostwriter for Hitler's famous work, Mein Kampf, as was reported by a former Nazi named Otto Strasser. According to Edmund Paris, Stempfel, pictured here with Adolf Hitler, was a Jesuit, but if so, he was secretly, since he was a priest of a different order. Dr. Ronald Cook believes that Hitler's Mein Kampf was related to the Jesuit struggle against the great Protestant leader, Otto von Bismarck, in the 19th century. It was Bismarck who expelled the Jesuits from Germany in the year 1872.
Yes, the Kulturkampf was started there in Bismarck's Germany in the middle of the 19th century. And Bismarck opposed Rome. And of course, Bismarck referred to Canossa, where the Pope had put his foot on the neck of the king that had come there, King Henry, and had declared himself kind of ruler of the world way back in the 11th century.
In the year 1077 AD, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV arrived at the fortress at Canossa Castle in northern Italy to ask the forgiveness of Pope Gregory VII, who had excommunicated him from the church. Henry was famously humiliated, being made to wait for 3 days while standing barefoot in the snow before he was forgiven. Bismarck's reference to this was, "We will not go to Canossa," signifying that he refused to submit to papal authority. His famous words are even recorded in German on one of the monuments dedicated to his memory.
In other words, he had no appetite for humble pie. So the Jesuits then led their Kulturkampf, and Hitler wrote his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. So the cultural kampf is the cultural struggle that the Jesuits set forth in Germany.
In the year 1940, Otto Strasser published the book Hitler and I, in which he wrote that Father Stempfel had twice revised the entire manuscript of Mein Kampf. Furthermore, he said that Stempfel's changes to Hitler's original work eventually brought about his demise. He wrote, "Good Father Stempfel, a priest of great learning, editor of a paper at Miesbach, spent months rewriting and editing Mein Kampf. He eliminated the more flagrant inaccuracies and the excessively childish platitudes. Hitler never forgave Father Stempfel for getting to know his weaknesses so well. He had him murdered by a special death squad on the night of June 30th, 1934. June 30th was the infamous Night of Long Knives, when Hitler got rid of his rivals within the Nazi Party. While there were many players in the drama of the Second World War, some researchers argue that the conflict was being driven behind the scenes by the superior general of the Jesuit order, a man known as Vladimir Ledachowski, who could be called Hitler's Black Pope. It was Ledachowski who assigned a Jesuit to Benito Mussolini in Italy, a priest named Taci Venturi, Mussolini's Jesuit.
In cui Roma aveva cedere il Giglio ed Augusto.
The Jesuit Venturi was one of the architects of the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which restored the temporal power of the Pope by recognizing Vatican City as a nation-state. It preceded the Vatican's concordat with Germany in 1933. Mussolini was called the first of the dictators, the founder of modern fascism, who greatly influenced Adolf Hitler. The Italian black shirts were the inspiration for Hitler's brown shirts later on, while Mussolini's title, Il Duce, which means the leader, was the model for Hitler's title as the Führer. It was Germany and Italy together that invaded Yugoslavia and established the Ustashi under Ante Pavlek, under the supervision of the Jesuit-trained Archbishop Stepanak. Meanwhile, it would appear that Hitler's Jesuit was the superior general himself. According to the book, The Secret Front, by German author Walter Hagen, it was Ledachowski who allied the Jesuit order with the German Secret Service. Edmund Paris says that as a result, many Catholic priests began to wear the black uniforms of the Nazi SS. American author F. Tupper Saucy documented his own history of the Jesuits in the book Rulers of Evil. He writes that during World War II, the focus of Catholic action politically was based on Black Pope Vladimir Ledachowski's strategy of bringing Catholic nations of Central and Eastern Europe together into a pan-German federation. To head the federation, he says, Ledachowski required a charismatic leader charged with subduing the communistic Soviet Union on the east, Protestant Prussia, Protestant Great Britain, and Republican France on the west. Ledachowski chose the Catholic militarist Adolf Hitler. In print, Ledachowski's Pan-German Manifesto took the form of Hitler's autobiographical Mein Kampf, My Struggle, ghostwritten by the Jesuit Father Stempfel and placed beside the Bible on the altars of German churches. Like Edmund Paris, Saucy believed that Bernhard Stempfel was a Jesuit. Meanwhile, Edmund Paris says, in fact, it was the Ledachowski plan, adapted to the needs of the time, which the Führer was trying to realize under the patronage of the Holy See. Rome's support of Hitler was also acknowledged by a variety of additional sources during the war era. The Protestant Truth Society published a work titled The Vatican and Nazism, in which they openly declared that the one organization which has been the means of placing Hitler in power and has assisted him in his conquests is the Roman Catholic Church, whose headquarters are at the Vatican in Rome. The evidence, we believe, is overwhelming. Another work, titled Behind the Dictators, by a former Catholic priest named Leo Lehmann, who converted to the Protestant faith, shows the relationship of Mussolini and Hitler with the powers of Rome. Lehman writes, "The Jesuit order, as the leader of Catholic action, has played a decisive role. We can even go so far as to state that Nazi fascism had its origin in the Society of Jesus, and that, like other movements in the past analogous to fascism, it was planned to serve the traditional aims of the disciples of Ignatius Loyola." He went on to say that the defenders of democratic ideology will not be victorious until they come out openly against their real enemy, the Knights of the Black Crusade, by which he meant the Jesuit order. Dr. Ronald Cook quotes the writings of a former Jesuit priest named Malachi Martin, who described how Jesuits were commonly defined prior to the 20th century.
Webster's Third International Dictionary gives the meaning of a Jesuit as a member of the order, then supplies the negative meanings. One given to intrigue or equivocation, a crafty person, terms that are amplified by Dorsel's dictionary, two-faced, false, insidious, dissembling, perfidious, insincere, dishonorable, dishonest, untruthful. A French proverb states, "Wherever two Jesuits come together, the devil always makes three."
It was Rome who, in the Dark Age, established Jewish ghettos and forced the Jewish people to wear the yellow badge of shame. But in the 20th century, the Jesuits would take anti-Semitism to even greater extremes. It was the Black Pope, Ledachowski, and the Jesuit order that fomented the political hatred against the Jewish people and insisted that they be racially linked to communism. In the book, The Pope and Mussolini, Pulitzer Prize-winning author David Kurtzer described Ledachowski as a virulent anti-Semite, kindly disposed toward fascism, a man Mussolini looked to for help. We read that the Jesuit magazine La Civiltà Cattolica had warned that Jews were the evil force behind a dangerous conspiracy. They were said to be the secret masters of both communism and capitalism, all aimed at enslaving Christians. Among the most influential Vatican figures pushing this conspiracy theory was Ledachowski, head of the Jesuit order. The groundwork of anti-Jewish propaganda was being prepared during the time of Pope Pius XI, who was compelled by the Black Pope to condemn communism. When the Pope prepared certain statements against communism, Kurtzer writes, quote, "Unhappy that they said nothing about the Jews, Ledachowski kept pushing the Pope to add language linking them to the communist danger." In their writings, the Jesuits had been pushing anti-Jewish propaganda since the 19th century. As this cover of La Civiltà Cattolica shows, from the year 1890, with the heading, "The Jewish Question in Europe." The publication mentions causes, effects, and then remedies, or solutions, which would appear to foreshadow Hitler's final solution program, which resulted in the Holocaust. The magazine presents arguments concerning the financial domination of the Jewish people, even referencing a book called The Desperate Struggle Between the Aryan People and Judaism. But in 1890, Adolf Hitler, who was born in 1889, was not more than a year old, showing that the ideas that drove the Nazi movement were developed by the Jesuit order nearly half a century before Hitler's rise to power. The Nazi method of blitzkrieg warfare overwhelmed many of the nations of Europe. Yet with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the tables would turn dramatically.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific.
Just as Hitler and Mussolini signed a peace treaty before betraying England, so the Japanese talked peace with America, up to the very hour of the Pearl Harbor attack.
A day of infamy. Even as Japanese diplomats were conferring with Secretary of State Hull on peace measures, Nipponese planes were swooping down on Pearl Harbor. This pictorial record includes both U.S. films and pictures made by the enemy as they dropped their load of death on the naval base, on Wheeler Field, on civilian homes and schools.
As King David had written in the Psalm, the words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. Japan had joined the Axis powers and its plan for world domination 1 year earlier through the Tripartite Act of 1940.
In Berlin, they drew up the Axis Act, the blueprint of the new order, and parceled out the continents of the world for Axis domination. Italy was to get the Mediterranean. Japan was to get the Orient, and to Germany would go the rest of the world.
Despite their grand globalist plans, once America entered the war, it was simply a matter of time before Hitler and the Axis powers would be defeated.
With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God.
According to Edmund Paris, this was what the Black Pope had feared. The Jesuits had worked through propaganda to convince the United States to stay out of the war. At least one Jesuit agent was said to be a Catholic priest and national figure named Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin had a huge following through his radio broadcast. Known for his anti-Jewish rhetoric, he also supported both Hitler and Mussolini. Paris believed it was Coughlin's assignment to convince Americans not to enter the Second World War, helping to ensure a Nazi victory.
May I remind our President with all due respect that not one of these soldiers cast a ballot on that fateful Good Friday night in the spring of 1917 to force a peace-loving nation like ours to take up arms for the profiteers and the exploiters of mankind.
In spite of Coughlin's efforts, America entered the war in defense of England and the cause of freedom. The Black Pope let Lechowski's dream would not be realized. Edmund Paris writes that Ledachowski already spoke haughtily about the general meeting the company would hold in Rome after England had capitulated.
Despite the propaganda and confusion of recent months, it is now obvious that England is losing the war.
But heaven had decided otherwise, Paris says. Great Britain braced herself against the enemy. The United States entered the war, and the Russian campaign was a disaster for the Nazis. For Ledachowski, it was the collapse of his great dream. The general's health did not stand up to such a disaster, and he died. In fact, Vladimir Ledachowski, the Black Pope, would die in December of 1942, just over a year after the United States declared war on Japan, Germany, and the Axis powers. When the war was over, the Vatican called upon its faithful servants in both England and America to help many of the Nazis escape trial and punishment. Donovan's OSS would play a key role in developing what was called the Vatican Rat Lines. The Rat Lines helped thousands of Nazi war criminals escape accountability, including such notorious figures as Klaus Barbie, Dr. Joseph Mengele, Adolf Eichmann, and Hitler's Ustashi leader, Ante Pavlovich.
Well, you can't talk about the Jesuits operating in the world today without talking about the most famous Jesuit on the planet right now, which is Pope Francis. Pope Francis goes around talking about, you need to share more of your wealth with these people. You need to open up your borders. Everything that's in the United States, everyone in the world is entitled to, and you should open the borders and let them in. I found it quite ironic that Pope Francis, from behind the walls of the Vatican, can talk about how wrong it is to build a wall at the southern border in America. It's because he sees all the wealth in America as common property, which is Marxist.
In 2019, the Jesuits America magazine published an article titled "The Catholic Case for Communism." It featured a photo of Pope Francis with the president of Bolivia presenting a crucifix made from a hammer and sickle, the traditional emblems of Marxism. The design was the work of a Jesuit priest named Luis Espinal, a Jesuit filmmaker and activist who was reportedly killed by a government death squad in 1980. A fellow Jesuit named Javier Albo would later declare that Espinal's intent was for the Church to be in dialogue with Marxism. There is no question that such dialogue has long since begun.
Pope Francis is one of the biggest advocates on the world stage for Marxism, and he finds the capitalist system reprehensible.
But where did this association begin? Many believe the Pope and Vatican have just recently embraced Marxist ideas. But one of the most notorious communists in history, Fidel Castro, was Jesuit trained and educated in 3 Jesuit institutions. Furthermore, the former Jesuit general, Pedro Arrupe, openly declared that the Jesuits were proud of Fidel Castro. As Argentine journalist and politician Norma Morandini writes, Fidel Castro never ceased being a Jesuit, instead adapting the religious and moral matrix of this Catholic order to Marxism-Leninism and causing endless confusion to the Soviets. This is the theory behind Fidel Castro, the Last Catholic King, a book published by the Italian historian Laurice Zanatta. Laurice Zanatta is a professor at the University of Bologna. His book on Castro is further described by an Italian website. We read of Castro that, like the Catholic kings, he fuses politics and religion, coming to conceive of a political religion, a community of faith, inclusive towards the faithful, ruthless with heretics. And his enemies are the same as those of Catholic Spain, Protestant civilization, and the Enlightenment, now renamed capitalism and liberalism. In other words, Zanatta seems to argue that capitalism is simply a Jesuit code word for Protestant forms of government.
I think it comes down to a foundational principle, and that is that if you believe that truth ultimately rests in the mouth and the words and actions of a single man, as in Roman Catholicism, then you're going to be attracted to a government and economic system that is basically dictatorial. One person who just declares what the law is, declares what the truth is, and he's to be obeyed. And that's why you find that Roman Catholic countries, say Honduras and Venezuela, and they tend toward Marxist, socialist, dictatorial regimes. Whereas the Protestant foundational principle is that you have to have a document that specifies exactly what we're all going to do, what we all agree to, which is why Protestant countries tend to result in constitutional republics, because they say lex is rex, the law is king, and whereas dictatorial republics or monarchies would say the king is the law. Well, Roman Catholics, because of their epistemology and their belief that the Pope is infallible and that truth comes from the church and not from the scriptures, are going to tend toward economic and political systems that center on a man or an organization to determine what is true. Whereas constitutional republics are going to, of course, rely on what's written down and agreed to. Constitutional republics can fail and monarchies can be nice, but that is why you end up with, Protestants tend to favor the constitutional written documents, whereas the Catholics would tend toward Marxist dictatorial regimes.
But to understand more fully the role of the Jesuits in the development of communism, we must go back to its point of origin in the 19th century. It is well known that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto in the year 1848. What is not so well known is that just 5 years earlier, in 1843, a Jesuit priest named Luigi Tapparelli published his own work in which he coined the phrase social justice. The official title of his work was Theoretical Treatise of Natural Right Based on Fact, yet he admitted that he based his ideas on a desire to revive the earlier teachings of Thomas Aquinas.
But yes, this goes back to Thomas Aquinas. And of course, Thomas is the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church. So he's the person all these Jesuits nowadays, they look back to, and they draw upon Thomas Aquinas.
Thomas Aquinas taught the doctrine of justifiable theft, the idea that it is okay to steal from your neighbor as long as you steal for a good reason. It was this concept that was cleverly interwoven by Tapparelli into his teachings on social justice.
One of the things when you read about social justice, one of the principal concepts behind social justice is redistribution. And it can be redistribution of wealth is a big part of it. And that ties in, of course, very closely with the idea of the welfare state, with the idea of the universal destination of all goods. Because people will say, oh, well, you have all these supposedly surplus goods, but these other people over here, they need those goods. And so we're going to get the government to come and we're going to take that from you and give it to these other people. And this is called social justice.
Aquinas wrote extensively on the idea of justifiable theft, examining various ways in which a person might steal from their neighbor without it being a sin. He wrote, "It is not theft, properly speaking, to take secretly and use another's property in case of extreme need, because that which he takes for the support of his life becomes his own property by reason of that need. In case of a like need, a man may also take secretly another's property in order to succor his neighbor in need." Furthermore, Aquinas taught that unbelievers had no right to property at all. He said, "Now the things which unbelievers have are not theirs. For Augustine says, 'You falsely call things your own, for you do not possess them justly, and according to the laws of earthly kings, you are commanded to forfeit them. Therefore, it seems that one may lawfully rob unbelievers.'" It is important to remember that within the papal context, an unbeliever is anyone who does not submit to the Pope. Yet the unbelievers are not the only ones who can have their private property taken away.
They have this idea in the Roman Catholic Church, and you can even find this in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I mean, this is very official Roman Catholic doctrine. It's a concept called the universal destination of goods, or sometimes it's called the universal destination of all goods. And to give you just maybe a very short version of what that means, is Rome is willing to tolerate private property up to a point. They say it's kind of a convention in their mind. They call it part of positive law. It's kind of a man-made convention. And they say, okay, we're fine with you owning things up to a point. But when push comes to shove, if somebody, quote, needs something, well, they have the right to take it from you. They have the right to take your property. And of course, if you're not willing to give that property over, of course, what Rome says is they can get the government to come and take your property. If you didn't have the universal destination of goods, you couldn't have justifiable theft. The universal destination of goods is fundamental to that concept.
One of Tapparelli's students was Vincenzo Pecci, who would later become Pope Leo XIII. In 1891, Leo published his encyclical, Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working classes, which has been called the Magna Carta of Catholic social teaching in modern times. In the book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania, Dr. John Robbins examined the economic and political worldview of what he called the Roman Church state. He said the following about Rerum Novarum, quote, "The encyclical's Marxism is so blatant that one Roman Catholic writer declared that much of the encyclical appeared only to repeat in more orthodox language what Marx had said 10 years before. 10 years before the Pope's encyclical, Marx had published Das Kapital."
And in that encyclical, the Pope used a lot of very communistic sounding language. And in fact, it was kind of interesting the way John Robbins described it. He said that there are whole paragraphs of that encyclical that could have been lifted out of the Communist Manifesto. For instance, one of the things that Pope Leo would talk about is he would talk about wages as a type of slavery. Well, wage slavery is something that you see in communist literature. They talk about wage slavery. And he wasn't the only pope to speak that way, especially to critique capitalism in that way. They call it a system of wage slavery. So Marx and the popes both agree, that capitalism is a system of wage slavery. So there are some things, there's some elements of communism that Rome likes.
Yet the connection between the Jesuits and socialism runs deeper still. In 1879, we learn that the great Protestant leader, Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, began publishing in the newspapers his belief that Karl Marx himself was working with the Jesuit general at the time, a man named Peter Jan Becks, a Belgian Jesuit who spent more than 30 years as the Black Pope. Marx revealed the controversy in an interview with the Chicago Tribune, where he said, "For 2 months, Bismarck complained in his North German Gazette that I was in league with Father Beck, the leader of the Jesuit movement, and that we were keeping the socialist movement in such a condition that he could do nothing about it." While Marx claims to be amused by the idea, he does not deny it. Bismarck expelled the Jesuits from Germany earlier in 1872, and he remained a relentless opponent of both the Jesuits and socialism throughout his lifetime. But there were additional warnings back in the 19th century, long before the Marxist revolutions of the 20th century. In the year 1868, the great Protestant historian J.A. Wiley wrote his book, The Seventh Vial, or the Past and Present of Papal Europe. In it he says, "If ever heaven in his wrath sent an incarnation of malignity from the place of all evil to chastise the guilty race of man, it is communism. But the hell from which it has come is Rome. Communism has drawn its birth from the fetid womb of popery, whose superstition has passed into atheism and whose tyranny has engendered lawlessness." Meanwhile, some years earlier, the Reverend Alexander Hislop, well known for his anti-papal work, The Two Babylons, also published another book titled The Red Republic, or Scarlet-Colored Beast of the Apocalypse. In the year 1849, he wrote, "This new phase of socialism will not escape the piercing eye of Rome, and if she finds it necessary, or for her interest, to pay court to the men of the Red Republic, she will not hesitate for a moment what to do." Popery in its first phase was baptized paganism. In its last, it seems destined to appear as baptized atheism. Another minister named Robert William Dibdin published a work titled England Warned and Counseled in 1851. He wrote, "The writings of the socialists. I maintain there is more than mere wickedness. There is more than mere delusion. There is more than mere fanaticism in these things. There is very much of anti-Christian system, which I trace to the Jesuits." The whole mass of socialists are not Jesuits, of course, but it does not take more than 2 or 3 masterminds to govern all the rest. Alexander Hislop saw the rise of communism in the 19th century as the beginning of the prophetic warnings in the book of Revelation of a scarlet-colored beast. To him, the Red Republic and the Scarlet Beast were the same. Furthermore, he believed that the harlot that rides or controls the beast is ultimately Rome. The red flag of the Marxist is said to date back to the French Revolution. But the doctrines that inspired that revolution are commonly traced to the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, which was a well-known haven of the Jesuit order. It was Jesuit priests at Ingolstadt that trained and educated Adam Weishaupt, the man most often blamed for instigating the French Revolution. Was it merely coincidence that the red flags of the French revolutionaries would be converted to the flags of socialism and communism in the next century? or that the red flag of the Marxists continues to be a symbol of rebellion against God and the rule of law even today. In the year 1916, the warnings continued with an anonymous author who wrote under the name Watchman. He argued that the relationship between the Jesuits and socialism was proved by the revelations of the German ex-Jesuit von Hoensbroek, who left the society because he found that the Jesuits in Germany were the chief leaders and fomenters of socialism in that country. The man in question was a prominent Catholic from a noble German family, Count Paul von Hoensbroek, who joined the Jesuit order as a young man, and upon leaving the society, published his work titled 14 Years a Jesuit. His writings were also noted by former nun M.F. Cusack, who wrote that von Hoensbroek left the Jesuit Society in 1889 because he found that the Jesuits in Germany were engaged in promoting socialism. He has written several pamphlets on the subject, and it is said that in consequence of this, he lives in fear of his life and has to go into hiding. The author called Watchman continued saying, "Socialism as it exists today is in the main a Jesuit organization for fomenting the great revolution which it is their object to bring about in every country." The writings of Thomas Aquinas and Luigi Tapparelli would also influence the development of another branch of Marxist thinking, liberation theology, developed by a Jesuit-trained Dominican priest named Gustavo Gutierrez, who sought to blend Marxism and Christianity into one.
Gutierrez was a Peruvian Jesuit who wrote the first real standard work on liberation theology, and he got put in later as a professor at Notre Dame here in America. So the Jesuits were certainly, and Malachi Martin puts them out more or less as the originators of liberation theology, and many others got into that because it was all talking about revolution. And then now Jesus suddenly became a revolutionary, the first revolutionary. And so you got all that all through evangelicalism there. But it really was all basically Jesuit. And the idea of liberation theology, as I understand it anyway, is that, because a lot of people equate it with fighting and revolution, but that really is the last part. Because liberation theology is supposed to be a message to bring in the kingdom of God on earth. And so I tried to win you to that as a Jesuit teacher or preacher, and I try to convince you. And if I can't convince you, I try to kind of coerce you. And if I can't coerce you, then I just have to get rid of you.
At the conclusion of World War II, French leader Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill both declared that their nations had reached the end of a second 30 Years' War. The first 30 Years' War was when Jesuits and their Catholic League attempted to annihilate the Protestant movement throughout Europe. The bloody conflict eventually saw the deaths of some 8 million people, but eventually the Protestant cause prevailed, resulting in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648.
In short, what the Peace of Westphalia is, it was a treaty. It was the treaty that settled the 30 Years of War. The basic idea of the Westphalian World Order, it created the modern system of international relations. And one of the most important concepts there is the idea of national sovereignty. That is, that individual nation states, that they have sovereignty, they have control over their own territory and over their own internal affairs. So, you can run your country the way you want to run your country, and Rome can't interfere in that and say, well, you can't do those things.
In the aftermath of the Second 30 Years' War, it would appear that Rome and her Jesuit priests are looking to overturn the national sovereignty of all the nations of the earth. In place of the Westphalian world order, they have envisioned a new world order. Open borders might be called a tactic of the Counter-Reformation. According to Dr. Ronald Cook, the Italian word is irredentism, a form of immigration warfare, a method for taking over a foreign country.
Not by military conflict, but by population control. So irredentism is certainly one of the marks of Romanism today. You flood in, and that's what we've had in Ulster there. They've come up from the south of Ireland. So now the political thing is, because Paisley used to say, let's not govern by the bullet, let's govern by the ballot. Well, they're now governing by the ballot because they've got more and more, so they don't need the bullet anymore. So the more you flood in, you take over all the branches of government simply by the numbers. So how do you get elected? Well, you get enough people flooded in there that's going to vote for you, and they'll vote for you. And that's another ploy of Rome. Irredentism is part of a Roman Catholic, I believe, teaching to take over the world.
Yet Rome not only opened the borders of nations, but also of the world religions. Through Vatican Council II, the Jesuits in particular removed the doctrinal boundaries between Christianity and the pagan religions of the world. In particular, the Jesuits said of Islam that the plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge the Creator, in the first place among whom are the Muslims. Together with us, they adore the one merciful God. Critics of Rome argue that Vatican II is a complete betrayal of the true gospel of Christ.
The Bible says if a man doesn't preach the gospel, it says, let him be accursed. Twice it says that, so that you make sure that the Holy Spirit makes sure that you get that. And Paul includes himself, so he's not just railing at other people. If we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel, let him be accursed.
Is the false gospel of ecumenism bringing a curse upon America and the world? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He said, and this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent.
The only answer is Christ and his gospel. That's the only answer to society's ailments and problems, to politics and education. The only answer is the Lord Jesus Christ and his gospel. That's the antidote.